Alrighty, so it's hard to believe that we are now already into March of the new year, and also hard to believe that we're already into the second week of the 2024 MLS regular season. And after a great opening week of the MLS regular season, let's see, will we have more crazy action that will happen in the second week, as we have a full slate of action, 14 games that's going to be happening, with 13 of them happening on Saturday, and only the one Sunday game that is going to happen. But there is going to be free matinee game that is going to be happening, and then we have 10 games that's going to be happening in the meat of the prime time slot. Though what's kind of interesting about this week is that most of these games are going to be happening between 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific, instead of the usual 7:30 p.m. Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. In fact, there's only one game in that time slot, and the team that is playing at home is not even an East Coast team, as there's a lot of teams in the East Coast that are actually playing on the road this weekend, and thus that's why we don't have a lot of 7:30 and 4:30 start. And there's a lot of teams in the Central time zone that will have home games this week. In fact, there's going to be five of them in Central time zone that's going to have home game this weekend. Also, we have the free late West Coast game that's going to be happening on Saturday evening. But that being said, let us begin talk about the matinee games, and we start off with the first of two matinee game that kicks off at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, and the first one being Minnesota versus the Columbus Crew. So this is the Christian Ramirez derby, as Christian Ramirez, for the first time, returning to Minnesota and playing against Minnesota as an away team, and it's also his first trip to Allianz Field too, because I don't think he was part of this team when Minnesota, of course, opened Allianz Field in 2019. But this game, as I said, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Both of these teams coming off of opening day wins. For Minnesota, it was an impressive 2-1 win on the road against Austin. So impressive that they were actually the only team to win on the road on the opening weekend. Whereas for Columbus, they were actually the first team to play besides Inter Miami and Inter Miami versus RSL, and they were able to win 1-0 in their opening weekend's action. Now, in terms of the head-to-head, 3-2-1 in favor of the Columbus Crew. I don't know if that includes the Leeds Cup win that Minnesota has against Columbus in last year, because both of these teams actually have met each other as recently as the Leeds Cup, and that was a crazy Leeds Cup where it looked like Columbus was going to win that one 3-2, only for Hassan Dotson scoring that equalizer, sending that one to a PK shootout, and yeah, Minnesota was able to prevail in a PK shootout. In fact, Minnesota has done well against Columbus in terms of tournament play. I mean, even going back to the MLS's back tournament when both of these teams face off against each other in a knockout round, and Minnesota was able to get the better of Columbus in the PK shootout. Now, obviously, coming into this game, for Minnesota, in their season opener, unfortunately, they're going to be dealing with a lot of injuries, especially on the attack. I mean, if you thought that last week where this Loons team were a little shorthanded coming into the game against Austin, oh boy, they're even more shorthanded in this game. Pretty much all of their attacking pieces are going to be out in this game. Reynoso, still question mark on him. Longwane, of course, just got back to the U.S. There's question whether if he even have enough fitness to get himself ready in this game, and also he only got back to U.S. because he was working on his green card. And then both Fragapani and Lillard looks like they're going to be out for this week after suffering an injury in the last game as well. So yeah, a lot of attacking pieces is going to be injured, and this is where the youth have to step up again. The youth really stepped up in the last game against Austin, and this should be interesting to see whether or not they can step up against this Columbus team. That this Columbus team is going to be dangerous. And again, this is the first time that they, of course, are going on the road on their title defense. And we talk about how Columbus is a team that, even under Wilfred Nancy, they were not really a good road team. And I don't know, is it mainly because of the system that they run is the reason why they're not a good road team? I mean, I guess that when you, of course, play that system, and especially play that system against this Minnesota team that likes to sometimes bunker and trying to hit on the transition. Maybe that, of course, wouldn't work out for Columbus, but I said that, and that's kind of the old tactics that we see with this Minnesota team nowadays. It seems like, and in the interim, head coach Cam Nolan taking charge of the team. They're more known to be a pressing team, so it's going to be interesting seeing two teams that kind of run similar style to see how it's going to be. But obviously, another thing that will be interesting about this game is that this defense is going to be really be tested. I mean, they weren't really tested a lot against Austin. They're going to be tested this week against a really good and if I say probably the best attack right now in the Eastern Conference and maybe in MLS right now. That is the Columbus Crew. And then moving on, we got RSL versus LAFC. So RSL, they have an 0-1 and one record, even though technically you could argue in their first two games they were the better side against their opposition, whereas they face against an LAFC team that is fresh off a 2-1 season home opener win against the Seattle Sounders and also broke the record in terms of winning 7 straight season home opener in MLS history. This game also started at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, so it's going to be a very early kickoff. It's a lunchtime kickoff in Salt Lake City for this one. But in terms of head to head, yeah, in terms of this meeting, LAFC has pretty much dominated this meeting 13-0-3, though RSL would say that at least they won one of the game last time. In fact, it was kind of an unexpected one. They were able to win 1-0 on the road against LAFC, and not a lot of team is able to walk into BMO Stadium and able to walk out with all 3 points, but that's exactly what RSL needs to do. And they're probably gonna have to maybe do it in this one because we know LAFC is very good. I even wrote the key points for them is can they continue their dominance over RSL, which they have had a lot of that. But really for RSL, it hasn't been a bad start for them, but it's all about that clinical finishing. They have to fix that clinical finishing problem. And I also think that Chicho Arango will be even extra motivated because hey, he's facing against the team that dumped him just a year and a half ago. So we'll see whether or not would that be enough for RSL to get the victory because they could be the better team in this game, but if they don't put away their chances and just leave LAFC some chances, LAFC has the edge, especially on the transition to really cause problem to their opposition, and that yeah, it's not going to be an easy home opener for RSL either, just like what I said about Minnesota United. Then we move on into the next one, and this is definitely one of the matchup that everybody is looking forward to, and that of course is Inter Miami versus Orlando City. So again, it's the Florida Derby. There was another name for it, but I kind of forgot what the name of it. It's in Spanish, but I think there was another name that couldn't come up the top of my head. But this game is going to be a 4:30 p.m. Eastern, 1:30 p.m. Pacific start. This game I think is also going to be on Fox. So yeah, it's not going to kick off at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. It's probably going to kick off at 4:55 p.m. Eastern. But for Miami, 1-1-0 in this game, whereas for Orlando City, 0-1-0 in this game. And in terms of the head-to-head, 5-4-4 in favor of Orlando City. Now, in terms of the last 5 head-to-head matchup, it was a 1-1 draw. Both of these teams faced against each other last time, but Orlando was able to win 3-1 on the road against Inter Miami. Got some revenge over Inter Miami after losing to them in the Leeds Cup. Then Miami was able to win 4-1 against Orlando before Orlando winning 1-0 against Miami, and then it was a 0-0 draw between both of these Florida teams. Now, this is going to be an interesting approach for Orlando City because on paper, yes, they would love nothing to beat Messi and friends in this Florida derby. But then on the other hand, you got to remember they have that big revenge game against Tigres, and this is kind of the thing that I'll say with a lot of these teams that is in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. How much are they going to really push the issue in these weekends game? And again, the balance between CC and also MLS is definitely a particular balance kind of weight, and we'll see whether or not if Oscar Pereira will really throw in his starting 11 in this one. I mean, he did rested a lot of guys during midweek, so I'm guessing most likely he's going to have to play some of his starters to kind of get their starters to stay fresh. But yeah, it will be interesting to see how long they will go. Consider they have a really big game against Tigres in the middle of the week. Whereas for Inter Miami, again, so far I know there's been a lot of people that have said that Inter Miami has been pretty lucky, and that you could say that their good start maybe just kind of are a mirage of the problem that this team has had, especially on the defensive end. And we'll see whether if that of course is true, especially facing against an Orlando side that this Orlando side can figure things out on the attacking end, and they have the ability to do so. Don't be surprised that this could be a bit of an upset, and it's not like Orlando has been able to come into Drive Pink Stadium, or now it's called Chase Stadium, and walk away with all 3 points. I mean, this should be a very interesting Florida derby, and again, you talk about a heated rivalry. this is definitely starting to become being one of them. And sorry, Atlanta, or at least I guess not sorry, Atlanta, because I don't think Atlanta really look at Orlando as that hated rivalry as Orlando does look at Atlanta. But definitely, I think Inter Miami and Orlando City, this could be definitely a very spicy rivalry, and I think it should have been a spicy rivalry to kick off in the beginning because the Battle of Florida is definitely a real thing, and we'll see which team is going to be the better Florida team after this game. And then moving on, we got Vancouver versus Charlotte FC. So Vancouver, of course, they actually are playing the first game of the season. They were the only team that did not play last weekend, and they're facing against a Charlotte side that was fresh off of a 1-0 win against NYCFC. Then have a 1-0 record, and as I mentioned, this is actually the only game that starts at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, 4:30 p.m. Pacific. I'm assuming this is going to be the only time that this is going to happen because usually that window is where the busy action and really is the kickoff of what could be a lot of games that has happened during the meat of the action. In fact, MLS 360 is actually not going to be starting around this time. It's actually going to be a little bit later, mainly because there's just so many more games that's going to be happening a little bit later compared to this kickoff time. But that being said, in terms of the last head-to-head matchup, there's only one other meeting. Charlotte was able to win this one. And in terms of the key points in this one, as I said, for the Whitecaps, this is the first game of this MLS season, and this also will be the first since that Valentine's Day loss against Tigres on the road. So you wonder, with the way that you've been off for almost 2 weeks now, how much of that fitness level could be a factor, or even the sharpness could be a factor. The fact that, yeah, just you had preseason and then you had to play in this CONCACAF Champions Cup, but unfortunately you weren't able to beat the almighty of Tigres, and now you got another break to come back. That's a very difficult thing for Vanni Sartini's to do, and we'll see whether if he can adjust. And especially, I think it will also help the fact that they've said that they probably will have a big crowd in this one, consider this is one of the 4 games that they're going to open the full bowl at BC Place. But for Charlotte, what would the approach be for Dean Smith now that his team is on the road? So we saw the approach in the last game too, and there was some promising moments, but again, some part of what we saw near the end of the game for Charlotte FC looked very similar to what we saw with Christian Latanzio, kind of a team that was just barely hanging on for dear life, and against a Whitecaps team that, while this Whitecaps team have not played a game since Valentine's Day, and they might be a little bit rusty in the beginning. We'll see whether or not if Charlotte can take advantage. I mean, that first 15 minutes will be very interesting to see whether, if not, Charlotte can take advantage. Now, moving on, we got Chicago versus FC Cincinnati. So both of these teams, of course, getting draws in the first weekend. I mean, for Chicago, they were part of that crazy game against the Union, drawing 2-2 on the road, while Cincinnati had a dull 0-0 draw against Toronto. Now, coming into this game, Cincinnati has a 4-4-3 advantage over Chicago, and keep in mind this is the first of 5 games that's going to be kicking off at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Key points for Chicago coming into this game. You got to say that if there is a time where you play against Cincinnati, this is the time to do so, because this is a Cincinnati team that I think the key points for this, and certainly for Pat Nolan, do he want to think about punting this game? And again, I'm going back to what I said about the balance between MLS and CC play. It's definitely not very easy to balance, and especially the big game in the middle of the week against Riotos. I mean, Cincinnati would definitely be looking at that and just saying that, hey, that's a more important game than what we have in this one. So we'll see whether or not if Cincinnati might decided to go with a weaker squad, though again, just like Orlando City, they relatively rested a lot of their players in that midweek game as well. And again, for the Chicago Fire, after what we saw in the last game where they were really good on the attacking end, can they follow up in this one? And also, can they be a little bit more cleaner the defense in front, because the defense was not so good last week against the Philadelphia Union. Then we move on to the next one, which is FC Dallas versus Montreal. So Dallas, of course, 1-0, while Montreal 0-1. And for Dallas, they currently leads the all-time meeting with a 5-3-1 record. In fact, both of these teams don't really meet each other, but when both of these teams meet each other, usually Dallas is able to be the one that comes up on top. And we'll see whether or not if they can do so again in this one, because they're going to have to rely on their youngster most likely in this one. There's question whether or not if Jesus Ferreira is going to be fit enough to play in this game. And also, they got the paperwork all done, and Pedro Musa have now arrive in the U.S. But the question is that I don't know if he's going to be starting, or well, I don't think he's going to be starting because he just literally arrived in the U.S. He didn't really get any preseason reps, though. You could argue he doesn't really need to because he was just fresh off of being with Benfica and they were in in mid-season. So I would assume that if he's ready enough, he might come off the bench and make a cameo. But once again, they're gonna have to hope that their youngster will shine, as what we saw in the last game. The youngsters definitely shine in the last game against the Quakes. And for Montreal, this is game 2 of 6 off their road trip to begin the season. Again, this is not a big surprise considering Montreal have basically said that they have ditched playing at the Olympic Stadium, so they're basically forced to play the first 6 game on the road because of the bitter cold that is happening at Montreal. So during the last game, where we definitely saw some promising from Laurent Courtois, especially in the first 5 minutes, we definitely saw some promise and almost kind of almost a reminiscent of a Wilfred Nancy team that just go nonstop on the attacking end. We see maybe some of that against FC Dallas in this one, and whether or not if they can continue to pick up points, because one thing about being on a lengthy road trip, you want to pick up as much point as possible so that you can still stay within touching distance of the playoffs, where once you of course get the home games, that's when you kick advantage. And knowing that was kind of what Montreal really did last season to keep themselves in playoff contention, I'm pretty sure they're going to try to hope to maybe get a couple more points or even get at least a win in this 6 game road trip to begin, so that they could be in a decent position at the end of the road trip, knowing that they're going to have a lot of home games in the summer month that this team is going to encounter. Now, moving on, we got Houston versus the New York Red Bulls. So the Dynamo, of course, coming off of a big 1-0 win against St. Louis City in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. And now it's going to be interesting to see how much of that momentum will carry, and that we talked about this before. How much will there be a letdown coming into this game against New York Red Bulls? That I don't think, after what we saw, what they did to Nashville, this is a Red Bull side that you got to be careful not to underestimate, even when you're playing at home. Now, in terms of the all-time record, the Red Bulls actually leads the all-time record with a 13-11-7 record. And again, for Houston, this is the third straight home games in all competition. But are they going to suffer a bit of a letdown after Thursday? I mean, or not Thursday, I'm sorry, but on Tuesday, that is. I mean, that Tuesday win against St. Louis, it definitely was an emotional win. And we talked about before, when you have an emotional win, you can maybe suffer a bit of a letdown in the very next game. Whereas for the New York Red Bulls, I mean, if they can maybe show their clinical finishing in this game. I mean, they can show that same attacking threat they had against Nashville in the last game and put into this one, and hope that the post will be a little bit kind to them in this game, because they hit the post 3 times in the last game against Nashville. Don't be surprised if the Red Bulls could pull off an upset in this one, and surprise the Houston Dynamo. And keep in mind, Houston, they also are thinking about another big matchup in the next round of the CONCACAF Champions Cup, because they get to face against the defending MLS Cup champion in the Columbus Crew in the next round, and that should be a pretty underrated matchup as well. I mean, I know there's some very spicy matchup in the CONCACAF Champions Cup round of 16. Hell, we have the Super Classico in the round of 16 in the CONCACAF Champions Cup between Chivas versus Americas. But yeah, I mean, besides that, we also get the rematch of the Leeds Cup final from last year between Inter Miami and Nashville. So, again, there's some big matchup, but don't estimate Houston versus Columbus. That could be an interesting matchup at, as well. But before that, Houston's got to keep their focus in this game again against a Red Bulls team that, again, after the performance they had against Nashville, they can build on that and show their clinical finishing. This is a team that can definitely cause an upset, and this is a team that have always done well on the road, at least for the past couple of seasons. So don't be surprised if they might pull off a bit of an upset in this game against the Dynamo. Now, moving on, we got Sporting KC versus the Philadelphia Union. So for Sporting KC, they of course drew against Houston for the opening game, whereas for the Union, they were part of that 2-2 draw against the Fire at home. And really, for Union fans, I think that they're hoping that this game is going to be a little bit normal, because the last 2 games, my oh my, it's been just crazy of how things have gone for them in the last two games. Now, coming into this game, key points for Sporting KC, and oh, by the way, in terms of the head-to-head, it's dead even at 7. 7 wins, 7 draw apiece for both of these teams, and really for Sporting KC, can they take advantage of a fatigued Union team? Because, this Union team, they play 120 minutes on Tuesday, and it's one thing to basically able to get an emotional win in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and especially just a really uh feisty and battle scar kind of game against Saprissa. But it's another to trying to come out of that and not only not have a letdown, but also trying to have the mental fortitude to go at it again in the next game. I mean, that's going to be really tough for this Union team, and this is where maybe Sporting KC can take advantage of it, especially when they're playing at home, which is a place that they have been playing very well. At least at home for the last couple of season, and they also will look to trying to get something that they didn't able to get until game number 10 of last season, or at least game number 11 that is last season, which is getting a win to kick off the season. With that being said, I am now going to switch boards and look at the last 6 games to finish off the second week of action of the 2024 MLS regular season. All right, so moving on, we got St. Louis versus NYCFC. So for St. Louis City, they were the only team in MLS that got eliminated in the first round of the CONCACAF Champions Cup. That is not named the Vancouver Whitecaps, but yeah, they're going to be playing at home against NYCFC in this game. And this is obviously the first ever meeting between both of these teams, as it is the case whenever St. Louis play against an Eastern Conference team, because they didn't really play a lot of an Eastern Conference team last season. But in terms of the key points with this one, after that heartbreaking loss against the Houston Dynamo, will they be able to respond after another first round exit in a tournament? And especially, I feel like in this game, game kind of maybe plays in their favor because, NYCFC, after that performance against Charlotte, which I said it's a nightmare performance, even though I know the scoreline was pretty close. I said it was kind of a nightmare performance because they really didn't wake up until like the 75th minute. And knowing that this is a team that loves to have possession, that's exactly what St. Louis want their opposition to have. They want their opposition to have the possession. They want to press high up the pitch and catch their opponent off guard, and that's going to be something that could favor St. Louis in this game. Now, we'll see whether or not if Nick Cushing is going to go with that kind of style, and maybe they might go a little bit defensive themselves, because again, there is a blueprint to solve the St. Louis team. We've seen it in the last couple of games, and even going back to last season too. There are a way to solve this St. Louis team if you just let them have the ball, and knowing that they don't really have a lot of players on that team can be the difference maker. Maybe besides Edouard Leuven, but he's been having a bit of a rough start to the season. You can definitely solve the St. Louis City side. So it should be a very interesting matchup between two teams that I'm pretty sure they definitely want to have a bit of a bounce back game, especially for St. Louis after becoming the only MLS team besides the Vancouver Whitecaps to be eliminated in the CONCACAF Champions Cup in the first round. Then we move on to the next one, which is the Colorado Rapids versus Nashville, and I actually got the kickoff time wrong here. I mean, there's been so many 8:30 and 5:30 starts that I'm assuming this game also starts the same, but no, it's actually 9:30 p.m. Eastern, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. That's the start of this game. But for the Rapids, oh, speaking of a nightmare start to the season, yeah, they definitely want to have a bounce back. And I will say that as much as it was a bit of a nightmare on the score point perspective. When you look at how they perform against the Portland Timbers, like if you just ignore what the disastrous start of the first half of them, they actually play relatively well against the Portland Timbers. But it's just that unfortunately they got off to just such a bad start against the Timbers, and of course find themselves 4-0 down before we even the halftime whistle. Whereas they face against a Nashville team, and again, I even wrote for Colorado for the key points. It's kind of like CNYCFC because it's kind of the exact same thing. And also, all-time meeting, Nashville is able to win all three of the all-time meeting with a 3-0-0 record against the Rapids, and they're looking to continue that too. And especially, with the way that maybe Hani Mukhtar is not going to be available again, and the same goes for Sam Surge, and there's even question if Walker Zimmerman is going to be fit enough to play because he hasn't played single minutes for Nashville SC so far this season. they're gonna have to rely on the youth again, and especially after the youth did very well against Mocha uh, in the middle of the week, especially by the guy Forster Ajako, which I think he definitely deserves a start in this game to see how good he's gonna be because when you have a young guy that has been confident and have scored a couple of goals, you want to give them another chance. You want to keep the young guys on a heater, and that they'll hope that these young guys that they have on this team is going to continue to carry this team. I mean that's something that I would never have thought I would have said about a Nashville SC team because Nashville has never been a team that's known for their youth movement, especially Gary Smith team. Never been a team that known for its youth, but it's definitely showing at least in the CONCACAF Champions Cup, and they have been pretty successful in terms of playing those youth players, and we'll see whether or not that transition into MLS play as well, especially against a Rapids team that I have no doubt that they're going to be playing much better compared to what they did on opening night. They're going to be looking more like the team what we saw in the second half against the Timbers, rather than the first half against the Portland Timbers on the opening weekend. Speaking of the Portland Timbers, they're going to be playing against DC United. So both of these teams, of course, have won their opening matchup, and this is one of two games that feature two teams that have won the opening weekend's matchup facing off against each other. The other being Minnesota versus Columbus. But in this one, it's a 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific start. This is first of three games. That's going to be the late kickoff. So there's actually a quite a bit of late kickoff game in terms of match week number two. But in terms of the all-time meeting, 4 wins apiece for both of these teams and two draw. And the key points in this one, we'll see for the Timbers was last week first half performance, maybe a preview of a dominant Timbers attack, or is that just a mirage? Because what we saw in the second half was pretty bad for Phil Neville's team. I mean, maybe part of that is that they really took the foot off the gas completely and they didn't really bother to attack. But we'll see whether or not if that was maybe fool's gold after what we saw in the first game, especially with the way that there's question whether if Evander is going to be healthy in this game as well. But for DC, talk about a guy that is red hot. Christian Benteke, can he get off? How will he do after fresh off of a hat trick? I mean, he's going to be a threat in the air, and that's going to be something the Timbers going to have to be aware of. So we'll see whether or not if he is going to do well. I mean, for DC, they're a team that has always known to get off to a good start, and don't be surprised if they can maybe pull off an upset in this one. I mean, would you call it an upset? Because I feel like both of these teams are very evenly matched. I mean, I would say maybe it could be an upset because DC weren't expected to be a good team, at least straight away under Troy Lesane. And again, it feels like maybe both of these teams are getting benefit because of the new head coach boost, because the Timbers also have that new head coach who's under Phil Neville because of it. Now, moving on, in the next game is the Cali Clasico between the San Jose Earthquakes versus the LA Galaxy. So anytime when there's a Cali Clasico, I have to bring out my San Jose Clash retro jersey because yeah, I mean you know that this is a matchup that goes all the way back to 1996. It's one of the most historic rivalry in MLS, but this is the first time that it's actually happening on a home opener, and what a way to do so in terms of celebrating the 50th anniversary for the Quakes in this game as well. Now, that being said, the Quakes would definitely like to perform better than the last game because the last game was kind of a microcosm of Luchi Gonzalez and his team last season, which is a team that just pretty much decided to bunker after getting the lead and then proceed to basically blow it after that. Now they're playing against a Galaxy team that that this is going to be an angry Galaxy team after they threw away 2 points, and especially you could argue they feel like they got robbed by the referee in the last game that cost them 2 points in this one. But in terms of the all-time meeting, 43, 18, and 33 in favor of the Galaxy, and in the last five head-to-head matchup, it's hard to believe, but it's been a while since the Quakes have been able to get a Cali Clasico win. In fact, they have not been able to beat the Galaxy in the past five Cali Clasico. It feels like the momentum has now swung right back to the Galaxy, where I think a couple of years ago it was the Quakes that just cannot stop winning against the Galaxy in the Cali Clasico. Now it's kind of swing the other way, where the Galaxy are dominating this rivalry. It was a 1-1 draw between both of these teams last time they met before the Galaxy did win 3-2 against the Quakes. Then it was a 2-2 draw between both of these teams. Then the Galaxy won 2-1 against the Quakes, and then the Galaxy were able to win 3-2 against the Quakes. I think both of those 3-2 games are the Cali Clasico at Stanford Stadium. Now this game is not going to be at Stanford Stadium, obviously. We don't get that until July, but yeah, this should be interesting. Again, being a home opener, this is a big occasion for the Quakes, and we'll see whether if they can definitely shine. And that I'm also going to be really keeping an eye on Luchi Gonzalez and how he's going to approach this game, because there is no way in hell he should be approaching this game scare, and he should be approaching this game of just simply decided to not to maybe score early and then just kind of bunker in for the rest of the game, because that just does not work against this Galaxy team that has a lot of weapons on the attack, as we saw last week. I mean, they could have easily won 3 or 4-0 against Miami if they were a little bit better in terms of their finishing in the first half. And again, you can argue they kind of maybe got robbed by the referee last week, especially of that very debatable red card that was handed out to Marky Delgado, who I think he's going to be available in this game because they appeal. It looks like they won the appeal for that, and rightfully so, because again, I think from what I heard, everybody have said that of course shouldn't be a red card. Even the guy that was on the receiving end of this, Sergio Busquets, have said that should have been a red card and a second yellow in some way. So it should be an interesting Cali Clasico between two of these teams, and hopefully the Quakes can finally get the better of the Galaxy. I mean, again, it's hard to believe that they have not won a Cali Clasico in a long time right now. Then we move on into the next one, and that of course is the Seattle Sounders versus Austin FC. So for Seattle, they of course are fresh off of a loss, and actually I got the record wrong here. uh, Austin didn't win their opening game. I mean, hell, they obviously didn't win their opening game against Austin FC, or not Austin FC, but against Minnesota, because they were absolutely terrible in that game. So I think this is also a matchup between two teams that have lost their opening weekend's match. So certainly both of these teams will look to bounce back in this game. But in terms of the all-time meeting, 3-2-1 in favor of Seattle, and the key points for them coming into this game for both teams, for the Sounders, will Pedro de la Vega get the start in this one? I assuming he's got to get the start. I mean, after the 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 energy that he brought in the last game when he came on, there's no doubt the Sounders have to start him. Now, I don't think he's going to go the full 90 minutes because I don't think he's fit enough to go the full 90 minutes. But just for him to start and bring that energy from the kickoff will really benefit the Seattle Sounders team, especially with the way that they're still injured to hell coming into this game. Now, the good news is they get to face against Austin, and I hate to say this, Los Verdes fan, but man, that performance on opening night looked like a wooden spoon kind of team, kind of performance. And unless if they can turn it around, and I even wrote CNYCFC and Colorado because those are two teams that are off of an absolute stinker on the opening weekend. Unless if they can maybe change it up for this game, there's question whether or not if Driussi is going to be ready in this one, and they're hoping he's going to be ready sooner than later because they desperately need him back on the attack. But obviously, that still doesn't solve the issue in terms of the defense that was just absolutely woeful in the first game against Minnesota. So yeah, for Seattle, yes, they're injured to hell, but this is kind of maybe the opponent that they need to face to get their season started. And not to mention, it's gonna be a night where not only the Quakes celebrating their 50th anniversary, but it's Ozzy Alonso retirement night too. I mean, it's not officially called Ozzy Alonso retirement night, but you might as well call it because him signing a 1-day contract, and that the Sounders have already said that they're going to be honored their longtime captain and officially uh, retire him in this game against Austin FC. So moving on into the last game, and this is the only Sunday game that's going to be happening this week, and it's an early one too, 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, between New England and Toronto. I believe a lot of the New England game is going to be day game, and again, that makes sense because you do not want to play a night game at Gillette Stadium early in the season. I mean, you already saw it on Thursday against Independiente, and there was barely anyone showed up for that game. And I know it was a midweek game, but you know that when it's like 30 degrees or 33 degrees, nobody's going to make that drive to Foxborough to watch the New England Revolution, no matter how good or bad they are. But in this game, they're going to be looking to bounce back after losing on the opening weekend against East United. Whereas for Toronto FC, got a surprising 0-0 draw against Cincinnati, and we'll see whether they can kind of build up into this game against New England. Though, the Revs there, they come off a big victory in the middle of the week as well, and they have a 16-13-10 advantage over Toronto. And the key points for this one for New England. With Varuni unavailable, let's see who's going to be stepping up in that number 9 position, or maybe we might see a false 9 situation. Maybe Carlos Hill might play that false 9 position, or maybe they'll actually have a number 9 in their team that is not named Baroni, because again, Baroni has been a bit of a disappointment for this team, and it kind of doesn't help the fact that he's got off to probably the worst possible start to what should be a breakout season for him, or else with getting himself sent off on the opening weekend. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see who steps up in that role. And really for Toronto, again, was last week impressive performance, a huge jolt in the right direction of this deep rebuild that they're going through, or maybe false advertisement, because again, they played very well against Cincinnati in the last game, and in some way they were kind of unlucky. The fact that they also hit the post a couple of times, and they could have maybe even sneaked out a big victory, which I think that would be definitely one of the biggest surprise in this early season if that was going to be the case. But this is the thing about teams that have no expectation. When you face against teams that has no expectation and expect to be bad, those are not always the easiest team to face, because I'm pretty sure John Herman is giving the message to this team that, hey, nobody expect us to be good. Everybody expect us to win the wooden spoon. Now let's go out there and show why they're wrong, and play with that free spirit, and we'll see whether Toronto can continue to do so, because again, I was very impressed in terms of the performance that they had in the last game, and that they just look, it felt like it was almost a fresh breath of air that they just breathe after just such a dark period that they gone through last season under Bob Bradley, and then eventually with John Herman taking charge of this team just recently. But there you have it. That is pretty much it for all the match that I've previewed for match week number 2. So as always, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of all 14 of these games from match week number 2? And as always, let me know in the comments below your prediction for all 14 of these games from match week number 2. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys leave a like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.